One Northern Ireland musical series bringing it all back home. Tonight, the strain of the dance.
Traditional music anywhere, by definition, is music which is passed on by ear, passed on, interestingly, by human contact. And I think that's the important thing about traditional music. I think that's why it is always, or should be always, warm, as distinct from music which is passed on by sheet music or, you know, by score, something written down, where you can actually end up interpreting a new piece of music without meeting the person from whom that music originated. Traditional music has to come out of an actual meeting of bodies in space, you know, people communicating. And I think it always has that immediacy and root and warmth as a result.
Irish music spread and flourished in America, especially in the Appalachians, where the Scots-Irish settled in the 18th century. In time, it developed its own distinctive Appalachian sound.
I think it's something that's well worthwhile. Okay, Joe.
One of the great exponents of this tradition is multi-instrumentalist Ricky Skaggs, who learned the fiddle as a child in Kentucky. In Nashville, Ricky met Paddy Clackin, one of Ireland's best-known fiddle players.
It's really nice. In parts of it now, I mean, I find it very hard to identify it as a, you know, as having a neat connection with Ireland. But,
right.
There are parts of it where you could say it's similar maybe to some of the tunes we might have at home.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely some tunes that you guys have that I know came over here that you call even a different title, like Blackberry Blossom is a prime example.
Do you have a version of that, do you?
Well,
a lot of people say a little bit more than their prayers about the connection between Irish music and American music. And for me to go to a place like Nashville, which is associated with country music, and to meet these very fine musicians and to sort of explore, in a very superficial way, if you like, to see if there was a connection between both traditions. I mean, I came away convinced that there is. And having met people like Ricky Skaggs, Mark O'Connor, like very, very fine musicians, and to sort of share tunes. And I remember being there and hearing little bits of tunes, and I could relate them back to my own. Wasn't able to make a full connection, as it were, but I'm certainly enough to know that that there was certainly a very, very close connection somewhere along the line. It was, for me, one of the best musical experiences I certainly had.
Like that.
That's very nice, great. Ricky, that particular tune there, you were saying earlier on that it had a fairly melancholy tone out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Why would that be, would you say?
Well, I mean, this is my theory, and I can't prove this, and I can't really, make any statements other than, myself and just my true feelings. But I feel like that the Irish tunes had a happy lilt to the tunes. And those tunes were brought over, to America years and years ago. And it seems as though that first or second generation children and that grew up playing those tunes and started missing their homeland and missing their folks, there was a sadness and a pining and a lonesomeness that just seemed to enter the music. you know, when your heart's broken, you're not playing happy. You know, you're going to play from your heart. You're going to play much more lonesome, you know, feelings. And to me, that's kind of where that Appalachian mountain, that high lonesome sound, even of the Stanley Brothers and people like that, kind of came into be as like second, you know, first, second generation, you know, descendants that came over playing that same kind of music, but just with a different heart, different spirit.
The cliffs of Moher on the west coast of Clare. Clare is widely regarded as the heartland of Irish traditional music. Irish traditional music has changed much over the years, both in the way in which it's played and in its function. In places like this around the west coast, it has, through its older musicians, retained a link with its past. Brothers John and Paddy Killoury recall a lifetime playing music for dancing.
It would be over 50 years ago, I suppose. There was a dance out here next door. That was the first house I played in. And there was another house over the road in, Thomas Nayland's. I played there, at Thomas Nayland's. That had been around the second place I played. And there was a house over here, then, this way, John Green, Jack Green we used to call him. There used to be dances there at Green's. The music that used to be there was, at the time, they have one of them big gramophones, you see, with the big horns about them. They'd have that gramophone in 78, older cars playing them. And eventually, you see, when the musicians would start, the likes of me now and this fella, they'd stop that gramophone. The only fault that was in the gramophone, you see, dance. There was nice music all right in it, but it was very lively, you see, very fast.
The time wasn't intended.
You see, and it might stop up, you see, for there'd be 4 or 5 or 8 on the floor. It might stop up before the figure would be finished, you see, they'd have to stand up on the floor. So they preferred the musicians, the music. They preferred it.
Gussie Mahan is a stone cutter. He works at cutting Liscannor flag, a stone particular to this part of County Clare. Liscannor flag is highly prized as a surface for dancing, and Gussie Mahan is a fine dancer.
Good.
Well done, good. Well, the dancers died away in...
The dancers died away, you see.
9 or 10 years
I'll
back.
tell you now what happened. Everybody around, you see, they had old-fashioned houses, you see, like I have now, you see. They modernised their houses, you see. There are about cookers and fridges and everything, you see, and all grandeur now. They wouldn't let no dancing carpets on the floors. They wouldn't let no dancing. No, you see, no. That's what happened, killed the dancers at the time. And then I'll tell you what killed them too, Willie. The clergy killed them, the priests. They was crying out of the pulpits that the devil was inside in the house, they said. The devil. For a dancer. The devil was inside in the house.
A house dance is a social event. The dances are called sets. The atmosphere is informal and relaxed. Despite the effects of modernisation, house dances are still held.
The old musicians would always say that if a player couldn't play for a dance and a set, he couldn't play at all, which was a very cruel way of looking at things. But it certainly did transpire that any player that couldn't put the music comfortably under the dancer's feet, he was thought to be just an awkward, bad player, maybe.
So it was the dancers were calling the tune?
To a large degree, yeah, because dancing was so popular. Every part of County Clare, right back into the peninsula of Clare. There were different sets danced, but it was dancing and music next, you know. They used to say, you stuck the dancers to the ground, and that would be the greatest insult on a musician. You stuck the dancers to the ground.
country dances were at the centre of social life in rural Ireland. Individual regions have their own distinctive dance tunes and styles of playing. Regional styles give Irish traditional music great variety and yield a rich harvest of different tunes and dances.
Playing for dances, the emphasis is very much on rhythm, whereas playing in front of an audience, they're more interested in melodic variation and so forth. That was the norm.
Right. And where are you from?
Kanturk, North Cork.
And was there music in that part of the world? Was that part and parcel of life as you were growing up?
There was. It was in the Slieve Lucra tradition. It was all slides and polkas, and all the music was for dancing. In fact, I learned at a crossroads platform playing for dancers.
So the tunes you're going to play for us are from where?
They're from Newmarket, which is about 4 miles from Kanturk. And they're 3 polkas, and they're very indigenous to that area. First one is called John Welsh's, the second one is called Jordan Max, and the third one is called Terry Tehan's.
Right, so.
When it travelled to America, Irish music left its rural base behind. It moved out into the fastest-growing industrial country in the world. There, it adapted itself to life in a setting that could not have been more different.
Well, the dance hall in immigrant communities has always been a major social centre in America. It was the place where people from the old world recently arrived met the people who were already there. It was a social centre in all regards, and music and dancing were always interrelated there. The dance music that had been forged in Ireland, had been composed in Ireland, passed on over the centuries, became very much part of the social life of the Irish Americans in that kind of environment here. And dance bands proliferated everywhere. Now, this was pre the recording era, so that the prototypical dance band would be a very large group of musicians playing loud enough to be heard. In many ways like the old Crossroads dance session in rural Ireland, but louder. And of course, when you think of America with its steamy cities, well before air conditioning, with the huge hubbub of noise in enclosed spaces, you could imagine that the instruments that were to the fore there were the louder ones, like the accordion and like the banjo. We don't know much about the particular musicians who played before the time of Captain Francis O'Neill, who was police chief of Chicago around the turn of the century, a very colourful man who was born in the County Cork. It's through him that we know most about the musicians who were
in America at that time. He did a lot of documentation of biographical type of the musicians who were here, the likes of Patsy Toohey, the great piper, the likes of the Hannafins in Boston, great Kerry fiddle and pipe player, and many, many others from all over the country. And it's through him that we get a sense of how vital the dance music was in the life of the community in a social way.
Dances, house parties and celebrations were important events in Irish-American social life. The common bond of Irish identity was expressed through Irish music and song.
Because the Irish were so discriminated against, and because they'd come from such dire conditions of poverty, there was a duality, there was kind of an ambivalence in their attitude to their culture. On the one hand, they loved the dance hall, they loved the old music, and they loved being Irish. On the other hand, they wanted to shed the negative images involved with coming from an oppressed peasant culture, and embedded in that image was the culture itself, which was the dance music. So there was a real paradox and ambivalence, and that really permeated Irish culture for many, many decades here in this country. On the one hand, they felt proud of their culture, and on the other hand, they felt ashamed. This was also the era in which radio was starting too, in the late 1920s. And there was a demand for recordings. So recordings of Irish music being made in America were sent back to Ireland. The likes of, say, Michael Coleman, the great Sligo fiddle player who came over from Sligo to America. Patsy Toohey, whom I've mentioned already from County Galway. Pipers and fiddlers and flute players were being recorded in New York. Those records are going back to Ireland. And in Ireland at the time, there was a very strongly based regional culture. If you played Sligo fiddling style, that's what you played. If you lived in Kerry, you played Kerry fiddling style. Well, with the records, what happened was there was a kind of a pan-Irish style of playing developed, and people, for the first time, had available to them other stylistic models of how to play the music. And ironically, in little fastnesses of rural Ireland, those styles were coming from America, from New York, where the immigrant musicians were meeting together, forging new styles even there. And it was amazing that all this was happening in New York City, 3,000 miles away from home.
One of the outstanding musicians of this era was the legendary fiddle player from Sligo, James Morrison. The recordings he made in the 30s continue to influence traditional musicians playing today.
He went over to America. He was regarded as a dancing master, you know. He was known as the professor. That was his nickname. The approach that he had to fiddle playing and the approach that he had to any tune that he touched on was just, you know, it can't be beaten. There's nobody's able to play like that today, you know. And I work towards trying to sort of recreate that in my own playing, you know. And I mean, well, I don't know. I'll give you a sort of a sample maybe, but I mean, no, you know, this is only to give you a picture of the kind of the spirit that he'd have in his music, you know. Now, I might be playing this a bit, perhaps a little bit too fast, but you'll get the rhythm and you'll get the idea of the music, how he would have approached it maybe. This is a version of the Rakish Paddy, a well recorded and well played tune in those days, but we'll see now.
In neighbourhoods like the Bronx, Irish traditional music flourishes. The children of these communities are introduced to the music and dance culture of their parents and entrusted with keeping these traditions alive.
Second step. Smile. Left. Forward back. Up. Hand.
Well, I grew up in the Bronx, New York, 238th Street. It's not the South Bronx or anything. It was a nice little Irish neighborhood. And I went to school in a pretty large Catholic Irish school as well. So all my friends kind of were in the Irish scene. And so when I kind of got into the music, it wasn't like such a foreign thing to a lot of my friends or whatever. They kind of could understand it a little bit. And I grew up very close to where my teacher, Martin Mulvihill, taught. He had a school based in the Bronx, and he taught a lot of the kids around the neighborhood.
So what sort of style of music did you learn to play?
Well, I suppose Martin was a fiddler from Limerick, and he had, I guess, that Clare Limerick style a little bit. So obviously my first influence was that, sort of very slow, melodic kind of playing with a lot of ornamentation and things like that. And the great thing I think about Martin's teaching was the fact that he really stressed the importance of playing a tune with rhythm and the swing. You know, not playing it fancy, but just playing it with that kind of drive.
Young musicians like Eileen Ivers and the members of this all-woman band, Cherish the Ladies, represent the new face of Irish music in America. As children, they grew up in communities with a strong Irish identity. Irish music was as familiar to them as it was to their counterparts growing up in Ireland, and just as alive.
People who don't understand good rock music say it's all the same. People who don't understand good Irish trad say it sounds all the same to me. And people who don't understand like Mozart symphonies or Vivaldi concerti grossi say it's all the same to me, you see. Even Stravinsky, I think, said once about Vivaldi, he wrote one good piece and kept repeating it. You know, obviously he was just razzing the man. But it is always what happens when you don't understand the musical language. It sounds all the same, but as you focus on it, as you stay with it, piece by piece, it becomes clearer. It's like learning a language. You've got to crack the code to understand it.
Well, you know, I was so impressed when you played that evening in Galway.
Yeah.
And anyway, let's try it again.
Yeah, let's give it another go, of course. Yeah, it's a beautiful tune.
It's an excellent tune.
Dunphy's Hornpipe, that was a tune that was recorded back in around 1915. Yeah. A man called James Morrison from County Sligo, a marvellous fiddle player. Yeah. I'll put a cassette of all the 78s that I have of him, and I'll send it on to you. And you can have a listen to his marvellous stuff all together, and you can hear what you're doing there in his playing, because he approached the tunes in exactly the same way.
It's a really elegant, beautiful musical construction.
Yeah.
It's a very fine structure.
Yeah.
It's an elegant tune.
Well, I'm delighted you think so, yeah. Yeah. Let's give it another go. Great.
The uniqueness in music resides not so much in the music itself, but in the person who makes it. And if you try and discuss the music independently of the person who makes it, if you talk about the song instead of the singer, you miss out on the singing, the thing that links the singer to the song. And the actual process of making music is something that resides in the human body itself, you know? It's in gesture, and in making gesture, the gesture results in sound, and this produces the music. I mean, this is why if you, for example, if you wipe out a race or a tribe, you kill its music as well as its people. And no matter how much film you have in the can or videotape or recordings of the music, all you're left with actually is product. What you've killed in killing the people is the process of music making. And I think that is more important than the product. The most important thing in music is the technique of making it. And in at the heart of the creative process itself, the thing at the heart of music making is something which is in the fingers or in the throat technique of the singer. So the Irish, no differently from anybody else, have evolved over the centuries a particular unique way of making sound that we call Irish traditional music. Why it has at the moment this international appeal is something that's more difficult perhaps to answer.
Perhaps Irish music has this appeal because of the way it is played and the context in which it is played. It can be heard everywhere. Traditional musicians today play in many different settings. They play as professionals, they play socially, and they play for one another.
The natural ambience for Irish traditional music performance is what we call the session. And the session is a very strange thing. I mean, we don't think about it that much. You go out, it's normally now at this time in a pub, and you get a corner of it and buy a few drinks and sit down and start playing. But there are all kinds of sort of unwritten rules. We had a Japanese visitor here to University College Cork, where we are last month, and he asked me this question. He was new to music in Ireland. He said, what is the session? And I started to try and explain to him, and I found myself getting totally tongue-tied. I had to sit down and kind of work out what are the rules of the session. Like, for example, there is no starting time, and very often there is no ending time. There is no payment between the people of the pub and the musicians. Musicians can arrive and leave at will into the music. Audience can arrive and leave at will into the music. And we see a musician arrives in and you find out that he doesn't know any of the other musicians. He buys himself a pint and he sits down and he joins in the music. He may go through 2 hours of music without ever shaking hands with anybody and have a damn good time. Something going on here, and there has to be some like unverbalized formula, and that is what the musicians themselves call the round. There are a handful of what could be called folk terms, if I could call them those, that we use as traditional musicians in ordinary conversation. If you sit in next to a session and have a listen to the chat that happens sometimes, somebody is saying to somebody else, okay, we'll do the Bucks of Moor, we'll do 2 rounds of it, and somebody says, well, how many parts in it? Well, I think it's a 3-part tune and the parts are doubled. Now, in there already you have a handful of terms like round, part, tune, turn, doubled. And somebody else says, yeah, let's do Willie Clancy's setting of it, because that has great lift. And you've 2 other words, and they're all in ordinary conversation. And if you ask the musicians straight out about theoretical terms, they'll say, we haven't got any. But there are actually words used. And the most important one is the round. And the round in Irish traditional dance music it's a physical feeling, rather than some theoretical concept. It's a feeling of main pulses. And it's breakable up into 8 pulse sections, which are called parts. I'll give you an example of that if I lilt a tune. If you imagine a reel which might go and that's 8 pulses gone. You'll hear it coming back again then, which means it's doubled. And you've gone through 16 main pulses now, and you can actually feel them going through your body. And you can see them going through the musician's body as well if you watch the actual body movement, which is very important in all kinds of music, I think. You now go around the turn of the round, and actually the musicians talk about turning a tune. And it's almost as if you have the tune, now you turn it, and you find the notes going up into a higher octave. I'm just improvising here now, but and then you get that bit again. We're now got into 3/8 or 24, and you get another 8, which brings you to 32 pulses. Now, this is the standard formula. There are exceptions to it, right? You can have, instead of 2 parts doubled, you can have 3 parts, 4 parts, 5, or even 6 parts doubled. But this is the standard formula. A 32-bar round, or a 32 main pulse round. You've done 1 round of the whole piece, and then invariably you get it 1 more time. You may get it more times, but the current thing is you do it twice, and then you head for another tune, a different actual tune. You do that one twice. And all the cues are coming through the music itself. And that round is a kind of agreed socio-musical formula that the traditional musician gets through some kind of osmosis when he's growing up or when you're growing into the music. That's what holds the session together. And that's why it's such a communal music.
Many Irish people in England see themselves as a community within a community. Their nationality is a badge of distinction. Traditional music is a focal point around which this community's social life is carried on. The session is central to the transmission of the music. It is at gatherings like this that players like Roger Sherlock and Bobby Casey pass on their tunes to the next generation. To return to Ireland is the aspiration of many emigrants. A desire to come back to the home of traditional Irish music is the dream of many emigrant musicians. A few realised the dream. One of those who did is Irish-Australian Steve Cooney, who now lives in the Irish-speaking area of the Dingle Peninsula, in the extreme southwest of Ireland.
A musician here is fulfilling a social function. You're playing for the set dancers during the week, and if there's a baptism or a wedding or a funeral, you will be playing for those people. You're playing for the same families, the same people all the time, through the good times and through the bad, and for their entertainment and backing them for songs. And you're at one with the community, whereas if you're doing the touring life, a different set of audience every night, it's quite artificial, and as well, you're dealing with all these middlemen and businessmen, and it's much straighter down here. But a musician here is part of the social fabric of the community, which brings a sense of satisfaction that you wouldn't get in any other form of music to me.
Does the music come from the people?
Well, it's a chicken and the egg situation, I guess, as to, I think the dance music is there so that to provide a medium for people to dance and get their feelings out, liberate themselves, a bit of exercise, and I don't know, I think the music comes from the land.
The heartland of traditional music is to be found wherever there are people through whom that music can be expressed. Amongst these people, the old tradition is renewed and the store of music and song replenished. The old tradition, whose beginnings were in the villages and townlands of a small country, spread out to embrace the great cities of the Western world. In so doing, it kept faith with those beginnings, never losing sight of the communities that gave it life.
37 tracks from Bringing It All Back Home are now available on cassette, album and CD. And there's also a book by Nuala O'Connor which accompanies the series.